45, and I believe the last thing we did was remove the contents of 2045 and insert the contents of 2294. And then there was an amendment offered from the Senate, and the House has had time. We asked for more time to review that, and we thank you for putting it off. It was a long, 12, 14 days, whatever it was. And we got through the whole amendment, and we are not able to accept that amendment the way it stands.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It also gave us an opportunity to review the amendment as well. And we have a substitute amendment, if that's okay with the committee. And I don't know if that's been passed out. Jesse?
Do you want to explain your amendment, or do you want to have the reviser go through it?
That's fine. Jesse, if you want to go through it, I can chime in if I need to. Thank you very much.
Okay. So the amendment in front of you amends a substitute for House Bill number 2294. You can see on page 2, there are insertions of licensed in front of any reference to a child care home or a child care center within that section. On page 3, this is similar to the previous offer where such pilot programs that are authorized by the Secretary may request state funding subject to appropriations made by the legislature. Page 5 talks about the budget of the Office of Early Childhood. And so when the Kansas Office of Early Childhood submits the budget for appropriations from the legislature, this amendment would include that the office include the use of monies subject to KSA 382102 and 382103. And those are the statutes that create and determine the use for the Children's Initiatives Fund. Page 6, it goes into the functions and directives of the director of the Office of Early Childhood. You can see that when the office is directed to maximize funds for efficiency and reduction, for the reduction of administrative waste, and then this amendment would include fraud and abuse in that. It also adds another item required that the office comply with all rules and regulations adopted pursuant to requirements set forth in KSA 39709. That statute is the public assistance statute, so that sets out all of the eligibility requirements for TANF, SNAP, child care subsidy, and Medicaid. Page 7, in new section 10, the director shall prepare and implement a plan for a comprehensive service delivery system in the underlying bill. What the amendment would do is that they would require the director to submit those plans to the legislature. Page 8, another item that the director shall do or the office shall do is to ensure that all of the Kansas Children's Cabinet functions in 381901 are executed. So to make sure that all those items required of the Children's Cabinet are completed. So 381901 is the statute that creates and outlines all the functions of the Kansas Children's Cabinet. On that page, this also deletes the Deputy Director of Child Care Advocacy. This was added during the substitute bill on the House side, so that Deputy Director is struck. And then on the next page, page 9, you see how that creation of the director is also struck. And here the amendment proposes that within the and under the Deputy Director of Child Care Licensing and Finance that there be an ombudsman. And so that ombudsman would take over all the functions that the Deputy Director of Child Care Advocacy was directed to do. And then you have some redesignations. On page 10, in line 24, what you see here is the transfer of duties and functions of the Kansas Children's Cabinet Director, transferring to the Director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet under the Kansas Office of Early Childhood. What this amendment does here is it ensures that all of those duties and functions and programs of the Children's Cabinet and the Kansas Children's Cabinet Director. So the duties and functions of both of those are appropriately transferred over to the office, and they are both, and all those duties are under the office. And then on page 19 and 50, it talks about, in the current licensing statutes, about immunization exemptions. And so, no, sorry, that was something else discussed this morning. This talks about interviewing a child who is being provided care. And so when a child can be interviewed, a child can be only interviewed under this amendment with the consent of the child's parent. So that is what that amendment does.
And if I may, Jesse, we realized this morning and revisited our team that in our original amendment on the bottom of page 33, line 37, would like to make a conceptual amendment to add to this amendment that when the state treasury of the Children's Initiative Accountability Fund, it says there's hereby established, and it should, after the word fund, say with the Office of Early Childhood. Again, making sure we have the Office of Early Childhood in here for the state treasury. Any questions for Jesse?
Representative Clayton.
Thank you. All right, so if we could all look at page 6 on the amendment, I see there's a balloon that says fraud and abuse. Is this abuse pertaining to child abuse? Because this is a child care bill, or what type of abuse are we discussing?
Yes, this would be related to waste, fraud, and abuse of public benefits or the funds that are being used to provide services.
Okay, so this would be regarding waste, fraud, and abuse of the benefits, not regarding abuse of children. Noted. Thank you.
Can we get a copy of the conceptual real quick? Thanks.
If you have the original amendment that we gave you, it's at the bottom of page 33. It was inadvertently left out this time. No, of the initial amendment, the original amendment.
Senator, can you walk me through what they, what you did with the Director of Child Advocacy again?
Well, the Director of Advocacy would be the, so are you referring to the Director of the Kansas Office of Early Childhood? Or I'm not sure.
Page 8,
Page 8.
26.
Oh, yes, okay, I'm sorry. Yes, we were concerned that there would be some confusion because in the state of Kansas, we have the child advocate. And so it's just renaming, instead of the child care advocacy department, it's basically going to be one person, so they don't really need a department. So they're placed in the graph, it would be underneath the division of child care. So the ombudsman would be under that division. So the first part, it strikes it in that first portion, and then I think it's on page, in one line it strikes it, and then later you'll see, I think on the very next page, it is where it puts on page 9, there is hereby established the child care ombudsman to be overseen by the Deputy Director of Child Care Licensing and Finance.
Okay, thanks. So now there's only 3 divisions.
There are 3 divisions.
Great. All right, I think we're good with that, including your conceptual amendment.
Thank you very much. And I believe we have another amendment from our side.
Madam Chair, I'd ask, we'll pass out the amendment. I have copies, and Jenna will read it. Have some too? Oh, thank you. Way ahead of me.
Senator, do you want to explain it, or do you want to have the revisor go through?
I'd ask the revisor to read the amendment, then I'll explain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, Senator. This proposed amendment would restore the language starting on page 13. This would be language pre the substitute passed in the House. The first changes on page 13 strikes the definition of religious beliefs in lines 27 and 28 on page 18. And this would be the language regarding getting an exemption from the immunization requirements of this would, the statute that's currently in is, I believe, 65-503, and this would be the newer version of that. And it would restore the language so that it would now read a written statement by a parent or guardian that the parent or guardian is an adherent of a denomination whose teachings are opposed to immunizations. And it would make those, and then on page 28, it strikes the words on page 20, on line 24. This is the section that makes the opposition to immunizations to not be disclosed. And instead of the statement of sincerely held religious beliefs, it would be the statement of religious objection to immunization, which would make it match up with the statute. And then it makes the exact same changes on page 45, striking that definition of religious beliefs since that would no longer be used. On page 50, and this would be in the statute, restoring the initial statutory language to require to obtain an exemption from immunization for daycare to be a written statement signed by a parent that they are an adherent of a denomination whose teachings are opposed to immunizations. And then restoring the language on page 57 regarding the objection to. And Dr. Clifford asked this question, so I wanted to just provide this for the body, that the language, that this would restore it to the statutory language, and it would also then match the language for school religious exemptions found in KSA 726262.
Thank you, Jenna. Gentlemen, I started in the legislature November 21st of 2021 in the special session. That was my first day here. And as you know, we created 44663 to provide adult, basically philosophical objections to COVID vaccines. And this language was brought into the child care bill in order to provide that same philosophical objection for kids who are most vulnerable. What I'm proposing is to match the language in the school statute, as you heard, 726262. As you might be aware, my Southwest Kansas district suddenly has measles reappearing after elimination from the United States for the last 20 years. And this is because of vaccine hesitancy and objection of folks to vaccines. The 31 cases currently reported are the tip of the iceberg. This weekend I spoke to several pediatricians, and what's happening is in an affected family, one member is going in. In fact, they won't allow them in the pediatric clinic because we have well babies there and we don't want to infect them. So they're all going to the emergency room or to a testing center at our public health center. So it's sort of like back to the COVID days outside in your car. But that one family member is kind of the signal case of what's going on in the family, and the families are not coming in. They know what they have because they send in the person with the red spots. So we're in the middle of a new epidemic of a totally preventable disease. 2 children have died in Texas, as you're aware, and we'll see what happens in our state. This is a totally preventable disease. There's also a disease out there called polio, which has been eliminated from the United States, but not the world, unfortunately. And we're inviting polio back into our lives. So I feel that it's important that for the most vulnerable children who are in daycare, that we at least stick with the language of the schools and not try to provide a philosophical exemption like we did in 2021 for adults. So I open for discussion.
I got a question for the reviser. How does this change the bill as far as if a parent objects to, what's the difference between objecting to it or having a religious belief against it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So under the current law, and then this would be the law of the amendment, in order to receive a exemption from the immunization requirements to put your kiddo in daycare, you either have to prove that your child has a medical reason for that, or that you are part of a denomination whose teachings are opposed to immunization. So that would be some sort of certification that I'm a part of this denomination who this denomination does not, is opposed to vaccinations. And the language that was in the substitute for the House bill adopted as part of the conference committee, the parent would just have to say, I have a sincerely held religious belief. So it wouldn't require that additional backing of a denomination's belief. It would just be a certification saying, I have a religious belief against vaccinations.
And Jen, is it true that the schools cannot question that, the statement?
I'm sorry, can you question what statement?
If a parent makes a statement that they have this belief that cannot be questioned by the schools, is that correct, in current practice?
That is not in the statute. I think that would just depend on the policy of the school board. I believe that there's some that require a certification from a pastor or religious individual, and then others that don't require much of anything. So I think it's just highly dependent upon the school. They would have to decide if the religious exemption fits or does not fit, and under their constitutional authority, they would have the schools would have the authority to do that, but daycares would be a slightly different scenario since they don't have those constitutional authorities.
I appreciate that, preserving local control, but I do understand the general practice is to not question it.
Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do want to clarify that this was an amendment brought this morning by Senator Clifford. It does not represent the Senate position, as the amendment represented the Senate position, and is open for discussion. I personally have no issues the way the bill is currently written, and I know that this passed your House, and we were adding things or making changes according to this, to the chart here that we had initially, and I realize that this is a separate portion.
Okay, so Representative Turk.
One question for the reviser, real quick. Ladies, the original language, where did that come from? The original language concerning the vaccines was adopted from a current statute. Where did that come from when you guys were writing this to begin with?
That is KSA 44663.
So it was an adoption of something else, but this version is not what the schools use. Who uses the version that we inserted originally?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So The language inserted in the House amendments, we'll just call it that, it comes from KSA 44663 that was adopted in 2021 during the special session, and that was for employer COVID-19 vaccine requirements. So if you as an employee wanted an exemption from getting a COVID-19 vaccine, you would just have to say, I have a sincerely held religious belief against this COVID-19 vaccination. What is in the statute currently for both daycares and schools, they're separate statutes, is the religious denomination language. And so under current law, those languages are the same, the adherent of a religious denomination. If the House amendment language were to pass, the process for daycares and schools would be different. This amendment would restore it so that they would be the same for schools and daycares. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so my concern with this is, in your explanation, you'd mentioned in your area that folks are hesitant to trust vaccines, given the recent history. And the response is to then repeat the rhetoric that led them to that to begin with, was government overreach? Is you want to make it harder for them? Is that how I understand it? You want to make it more difficult for them to then trust the system instead of allowing them to make that decision for themselves? You want it to be more difficult for them to refute the vaccine? Go ahead.
Parents have a right to object on behalf of their children, but a daycare can't be forced to have them present. What's happening in Southwest Kansas now are parents aren't taking their kids to daycare for fear that a child there has measles. As you know, measles can linger in the air. If someone is in this room at 7 this morning, their virus could be still airborne here and contagious. So yeah, I hope that explains it.
Yeah, that does. One last thing before I put this down. So as of now, the daycares are treated as a corporation, and with this language, they'd be treated as a school, essentially, the same way as a school. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So daycares are, I guess there's two separate categories because there are some that are run by schools, but the majority are private businesses, and their procedure for requiring vaccines is the same as for schools, current law. They both have to do the same thing. The House amendment language would be an easier way for a parent to get a religious exemption to put their kiddo in daycare without vaccinations.
thanks, that's all I needed. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So I think this is to Senator Clifford. So you are trying to have consistency with daycares and preschools so that then when those children are ready to go to elementary school, they're going to be probably on target for that. And the same criteria for the vaccinations?
Exactly. I mean, the childhood vaccination series is a well-developed series of medical care for most vulnerable children, and the children who share that space with them, some of whom can't be vaccinated because of autoimmune diseases, kidney transplants, things like that. So yes, that's exactly right.
So on the House side, in caucus, when we were talking about this bill, there was a lot of discussion over that immunization clause. And if you remember back when we did the COVID vaccination laws, in the special session, we had a lot of people that were concerned about the vaccination and had religious beliefs not to take it. And there were a lot of questions from government agencies on what religion, and they had to jump through additional hoops And that's why we wrote the law the way we did, to clear the air and allow them to make their own decision. This was inserted after we pulled the bill from the floor the first time and redid the bill in House Commerce. And so I don't know, we're not prepared to accept this change at this time. Representative Clayton.
You know, one thing that I do want to bring up too is that I think the difference between following that conscientious adult language that came from that special session, I think that there is a difference between adults objecting to a brand new vaccine such as COVID. And then when we look at things like the MMR, which I think has been around, you know, it's like I've had it, so it's certainly been around for a number of years. And so I think technology that is at least 40 years old, especially medical technology, especially that is in line, I think that we look at a different line of delineation when it comes to adults in the workplace versus children, especially because we're talking about infant care too, because, so this isn't, if it's a child under 6 months, they're not able to complete their entire vaccination schedule. So we're talking about, there's a big difference between adults being exposed to a potentially new vaccine or being obligated to take it and exposing infants to diseases like measles that can kill them. So it's kind of like an apples and oranges thing in this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And those are all the amendments that we have.
Okay, so where we stand now is that we've inserted the language for 2294. We've accepted your First Amendment and your conceptual amendment and declined the Second Amendment. Okay. Are there any other questions or concerns on the bill? Senator.
Thank you. Just a clarifying question for the revisers. Since the immunization amendment did not get on, could a daycare have requirements even if a parent objected to those? A daycare could still choose whether or not to accept a child?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, Senator. Yes, or I guess if a daycare were a private business, then they would be allowed to set their own additional policies in place regarding vaccinations and what children they would or would not accept into their care.
Representative Clayton.
That kind of brings a question. So if you are a parent, and let's say that this becomes law, if you are a parent shopping for in-home daycare, does the parent, the consumer, have the ability, at least under, if this became law, to ask the daycare provider, hey, is this a vaccine-friendly or a vaccine-hostile environment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, there would be nothing in statute to prohibit it, but there also would not be anything that would specify we are vaccine friendly or anti-vaccine friendly. Like there wouldn't be a standard by which parents would know, and a daycare could say anything they wanted.
Wait, so they could lie?
Well, I just mean like you could advertise and then not enforce. I mean, just like another business could do. Like there wouldn't be anything in statute prohibiting marketing a certain way or not a certain way. And
Thank you.
Senator.
Mr. Chair, I believe we're ready to vote on the amended conference committee.
You need to have any discussion? Okay. We're good with it if you're good with it.
We have 2 of 3 of us that are good with it. Senator Clifford is a no.
We're going to need to do an agree to disagree. Okay. We'll get that done. Thanks. Revisers are good with that? You understand where we're at on that? Agree to disagree? Okay. All right, thanks. We're adjourned.